What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Financial Tip Tuesdays. Last week we covered a little bit about financial statements, more specifically the balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow statements. This week we are talking about write-offs. So we're going to be talking more based on the income statement and the activity that happens through the income statement. And some of the confusing parts and pieces of what people think they might be able to write off that they actually can't, and some other things that people think they might not be able to write off, but they actually can.
All right, guys, to jump into it, here we have our income statement and our balance sheet. Very simple rundown of a balance sheet and income statement just for the purposes of this discussion. Um, so for our income statement, it looks like we have just simple revenues, money coming into the business from operations, and then we have our operational expenses, that money that is cash money spent for operations of the business, and we have our net income of just over $15,000. Our balance sheet is comprised of cash and accounts receivable. Again, this accounts receivable is money that or sales that they are expecting to receive the money from the next 30 to 90 days. We have a couple cars, a couple vehicles on the balance sheet, as well as some office equipment or furniture. Looks like we have some accounts payable for some expenses that have been incurred but not yet paid. It looks like we also have a couple vehicle loans that we are paying off as well. And then we have our equity account. Looks like we have some contributions, and that's money that the owners have put into the business to keep it running, as well as some distributions, which is money that the owners have been taking out as their paycheck for running the business. And we also have retained earnings, which this is the item that we talked about last week. That is the net income number that flows down into the balance sheet item, and that is where the net income for the company is housed year over year. So to jump into it, the first thing that jumps out to me as a question of what we can and cannot write off, and where I would kind of start to look as an accountant, is whether this individual or this business is writing off the payments for these vehicle loans. A lot of people I talk to, there's a lot of confusion on whether or not you can write off the entire loan payment for the vehicle or not. And unfortunately, you cannot. You cannot write it off. What would happen is, as we spent cash on those vehicle payments, our cash would go down by the amount of the payment, and our vehicle loan would also decrease by the amount of payment as well. What you can deduct, though, is that interest portion of that vehicle loan. So each one of these vehicle loans has an interest rate attached to it. And so that interest portion of that vehicle loan is deductible, and it's deductible right here on the interest line item on the income statement. And you are able to write that off. So that's from this company, that's what kind of jumps out at me firsthand of what can and cannot be written off. Depending on how the company is taxed and how the company is set up, sometimes these distributions can be categorized as a payroll item, and so you would see a payroll coming in through here for about $75,000, depending on who's getting the payroll. Since this individual is not set up on payroll, it comes through as distributions right here, and it's not written off against the company income. And also, some questions that I also get is on meals and entertainment. A lot of times individuals don't understand that they can write off any meal or entertainment that's involved in business. So for example, if you take a client out to lunch to talk about business stuff or business related items, or if you're talking to potential leads that you want to try to land in the next few months or few weeks, those items are definitely able to be written off, and they should definitely be written off. A lot of times for realtors, especially if you rent out a movie theater for your clients to come watch a movie as a client appreciation type thing, that can be written off as either a client appreciation or even advertising if you're trying to grow your clientele base and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different things that can and cannot be written off. Another big one that I deal a lot with is mileage. That is such an important item to keep track of, to write off. We can't necessarily write it off on the income statement. What you would write off on the income statement are like your car and fuel expenses, which are income statement items. But generally, under the tax law, we can either do what's called a standard deduction or an actual deduction for vehicle expenses. And at least for realtors, the standard deduction is generally a lot more advantageous to take advantage of, and because of that, we don't necessarily need to keep track, or we should still keep track of it, but we can't take the fuel and the repairs and maintenance and the stuff like that individually as an expense item. We take the IRS rate for the mileage over the year, and we're able to deduct that and write that off against our taxable income. Um, in order to do that, it is important to make sure that we keep mileage logs. There are a lot of apps available out there to keep track of your mileage. If you have any other questions about that, feel free to reach out and we can talk more about that. But in a nutshell, those are some key items that I see the most of what people get confused of what they can and cannot write off. Obviously, it depends very significantly on the individual circumstances on what you can and cannot write off. And so it's always important to reach out to your accounting professional to figure out what you can and cannot write off. But in general, these are a few items that I see the most
Yeah, guys,
of.
hopefully those are a few pointers that help guide you when you're finding out what you can and cannot write off. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. My email is steven@slgadvising.com. Also visit my website and feel free to set up a call and we can chat on the phone if that's easier as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.